We are starting a new series, which in kind of church world means that we're starting a new discussion that usually goes between 3 to 5 weeks. And for us, it's a great time to come because you get to hear why we're starting this discussion and how it all kind of is getting to kick off. And then today I'm excited about what we're going to talk about. You're not going to be excited at all about what I'm going to talk about today. I'm just going to let you know. But I'm excited about it, so hopefully I can share some of that energy with you. This series was designed around this idea. It was regarding a verse, ReVerse. It was regarding the verse in Matthew 20:26. And it has everything to do with the statements that Jesus Christ, when he was here on this earth, he made statements that sometimes were confusing, and they kind of went against logic. So he said things like, if you want to gain your life, you need to lose it. Blessed are the poor. If you want to see this happen in your life, it's going to look differently for you. So here's in Matthew, the verse that we wanted to kind of jump off with every week in Matthew 20, and I'll give you the whole context of this verse. Jesus called the disciples together. He says, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. So that's the key of this verse. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. The hitch in that verse is that statement. Hey, you know what it's like this? Like you see how it's exampled, you see the guidelines, you see the systems in place around you. Hey, for those that want to follow me, for those that want to be a part of maybe what I'm doing, it looks differently. Not so with you. And then he goes on to explain what it looks like. And so we're talking about not just regarding this verse, but this idea that we're looking at the reverse economy of God, that there is some way, some system, some guidelines, laws, behaviors, things that we embrace as an economy in which God works that sometimes flies right in the face of logic, flies right in the face of everything around, everything I learned in health class, right? Everything I learned at work, everything I learned from the people around me, somehow the system, the way of thinking, it's reverse with God. And so we want to approach a few different themes in this conversation of the series ReVerse. And so we are approaching today, you can't talk about the economy of God without understanding the word economy. We're going to talk about money. And that doesn't excite anyone, ever, We're going to talk about money, and most people, church get a bad rap because we talk about money, and you're like, man, this is the day I should have definitely slept in. Like, all I want to do is see the game today. This is not what I wanted to come to church for. But here's my goal this morning. My goal is to help you every way I possibly can maybe understand something you didn't understand when you came in here. Okay, so regardless of how you've ever been, how you equate money with church and tithing and whatever it is, whatever you think, whatever you think that is, I want to hopefully help you today. 2 things I want to tell you up front. I don't want anything from you, okay? We as a church do not want anything from you. There's no children's wing extension happening next week based on how many times we passed the plate today. That's not happening, okay? For us, we really do believe with everything we teach that there's something in here as we devote our lives to being followers of Christ, that there's something for us. There's something for us that we need to know, that we need to see, that's for our lives. And so we don't want anything from you, and I'll even explain a little bit more about that a little bit later on. And so the idea of money came along because when we wanted to talk about the series, it was like, okay, Jesus spent so much time talking about money. He actually talked more about money than he did heaven and hell, which was odd to me when you do a little bit of research because, isn't that why he came? To make sure people go to heaven and not hell? And there's a whole bunch of scriptures about that. And I said, yeah, I get it. But Jesus himself, when he was teaching, he taught in parables oftentimes. And so out of 38 parables, 16 are about money or the use of money. Okay, they're about money or how we use money. And so that's almost half. There's a significant portion of what Jesus had to say that had to do with money. And a lot of times, again, if you look at the context just of Jesus, it didn't make a whole lot of sense because he wasn't here on the earth very long. He wasn't building anything financially. So it's kind of odd that he had this conversation so much about money. So much teaching was about money. And so the verse we wanted to go to today that we're going to park on is Luke 16. If you get your Bible with you, you can look at Luke 16. I'll put it on the reference monitor for those watching online as well. But Luke 16, there's one verse. It comes following up one of the parables that Jesus talked about money, and it's a weird one. I don't even want to try to go there today because it's about a shrewd business manager that cheated his boss, and then his boss was like, "Man, you got me." It almost compliments him, and it's very strange. Then Jesus teaches a lesson out of that shrewd manager, and then from there he teaches a lesson about what you've been given, the responsibility that you have, very similar to what we read in the talents parable. But then he makes a shift, and he makes a very broad, big statement. And it starts with this: no one can serve two masters. It says, for you will hate the one, or you will love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. So Jesus paints this picture after he talks about money, and he says, look, no one can serve two masters. It's not like us in the corporate world, in the corporate world where you've got many managers, and those managers are supposed to align. You guys know what I'm saying, right? So there's the boss, and then the district manager, and the regional manager, and then there's me. That's how it was when I was in corporate world. I wasn't a manager. I was the one down here. So all of a sudden, all your bosses, they're supposed to align. They're supposed to be kind of saying the same thing, and so you really kind of don't feel any tug or direction. You feel like there's some sort of alignment there. But Jesus is painting this picture. There's two masters that actually are at war with each other. They have different views. They have different opinions. And when you get pulled and you feel the tension of two different ways of thinking, two masters of you can't serve both. Corporate world, you nod your head if you know what I'm saying. You can't make that boss happy without hacking that boss off. There's no way. So you get to this point where Jesus says there's two masters involved here. You can't serve both. You're gonna favor the one over the other. You're gonna devote yourself to one. You're gonna despise the other. And then he follows the statement up with this: you cannot serve both God and money, which doesn't make any sense. Because I thought for sure he would have said the devil, because that's oftentimes what we think. Well, you cannot serve God and Satan. You got to choose a master. And for some reason, after all of this talk again about money, Jesus goes, "This is important, guys. You can't have it both ways. There's something going on here. You cannot serve God and serve money." And so before we break that down, I want to actually kind of walk backwards. Instead of just focusing on exactly what Jesus says here, I want to go back in time, if you will, and talk about, again, this idea that there might have been something different about money that God wanted us to know. That there's a reverse economy, there's a reverse way of thinking, and we have to go back in the Old Testament. We have to go back to really the dawn of men to see this, and then kind of work our way forwards, and we'll come back and read that verse again. Very quickly, not to bog you down in history, just follow it with me through the narrative. From Adam and Eve forward, God you read the Old Testament where God oftentimes asked the people that were connected to him, the people that were following him, he asked them for something called offerings. He asked them for something of value to be given to God. That was just a big deal in terms of it started with Abraham, and Abraham, and his people, and all of a sudden they were bringing these offerings to God of vegetables and fruits and fields and harvest, and sometimes you read it's called first fruits. And so we oftentimes see this economy being played out in this idea of offerings. Well, there's another thing that ties to that in terms of just money and giving, is they had this system put in place about tithing. Which actually the tithe, there's nothing special about that word. It just means tenth. That's all it is. In their language, it just meant tenth. So when people brought a tenth to the church, or they brought a tenth to the chapel or to the temple or to the tabernacle, that was just how you read the Old Testament. They used the word tithe. And so very early on in their history, when God, through Moses and through the law and through some of the Levitical law, he's basically setting up his people for success. He tells Abraham, "Hey, Abraham, I'm going to bless you, and you're going to bless the world." That's what's going to happen. I'm going to bless you, and you're going to bless the world. And everyone's going to know that you're my people. And then through Moses and through the Levitical law, he actually sets up all these ahead of its time systems. Don't eat that food. Your people will die. You don't have ways to be sanitary. So he actually taught them sanitary things so that the people of God would would live longer, so that the people of God would be successful. Here's some systems. Here's some rules. Here's some guidelines. Here's something that in my economy makes sense because I'm going to bless that, and everyone's going to look and see, and you're going to bless the nations. You're going to bless the world. I've got something amazing for you. And when it came to money, it had to do with this thing about giving. Giving back to God in offerings and first fruits. So oftentimes they take the best, the first day's worth of work or the first amount that they got of the harvest, they'd bring it back and they'd give it to God. And then God set the system up again, the tithing, this tithe, that people just, our day we don't even use those words. It's a tenth. They'd bring a tenth back, and God set up a system by which it would flow. Okay, you're going to do this. I have a whole section of people, a whole tribe, that their entire job, they're not going to work the lands, they're not going to raise animals, they're going to do the work of mission and ministry. They're going to be the ones that serve you, that serve the nation. And so you're going to bring your tenth in to the people, to the tribe, to the tabernacle, to the temple. You're going to bring that in, and that's how I'm going to organize a system of you doing what I've asked you to do, a system I've put in place for you, and how it's going to work itself out. And so it's amazing because sometimes people ask me, well, why did he say, what's the deal with 10? I don't understand the 10th. And I'm like, you know what? Good, I don't know either. Okay, let me just dig down real deep into the Greek. I don't know why. Okay? There is no special thing about 10. It's just what God did. So there must be something. God must know something we don't know. It must ride this line, this teeter-totting line of okay, if you bring a 10th, not an 8th or a 15th, but you bring a 10th to me, it's gonna put within you enough of a sacrifice. So you're disciplining yourself to come and do this, but it's also gonna provide enough for what I plan to do with it, and it's going to provide enough for you to do what you needed to do, and somehow it's just going to hit this perfectly. That if you bring a tenth, that no matter what your income is, no matter how I've blessed you, I blessed John with 15 sheep, and I blessed Susie with 140 sheep, and your crops, if you just bring a tenth, no matter how I've blessed you, you're going to come back and offer that as an offering in proportion to how I've blessed you. And watch what I'm going to do. God was just constantly saying, look at what I'm going to do with this system I've put in place for you. And so many times, as we see in the Old Testament, so many of the things that God put in place, we just constantly messed up. The people of God, there was an affluent time in their history where they were living kind of to this reverse thinking, this economy of God. They were living this way, and the Israelites were a powerful nation, and they were rich, and they were blessed, and they were blessing the world. And then there were other times where they rebelled against it. They'd rub up shoulders against other cultures, and they'd say, well, why can't we have a king? Everybody else has a king. Why can't we do that? They do everything through slavery. Why can't we do that? They do everything from oppression and oppressing people. They get them to go out there and do the things, and that way they get more fields and more work and more stuff. Why can't we do that? Where there was a law of gleaning where they said don't even plow your fields all the way to the edge. When you make your first pass and picking apples, if you didn't get it all, God was like, there was a law. Don't worry about it. Don't go back. We're going to let those foreigners that come through your land have it. Like, there was something about God saying, I want to create a system that just perfectly designed for you to be able to express gratitude for how I've blessed you and to create a certain amount of dependency on me to be your provider. And watch what I'm going to do. And again, the people of God rebelled. And if they didn't rebel, they lost sight of it being a law and a guideline that was for you, and they made it all about the behavior, and they made it a burden, and they made it a chore, and they made it out of guilt and shame, and they put it on people like a weight they couldn't bear. That was just the way it happened. And in Malachi, it's a great set of verses. God reminds them of the system. Well, actually, I'm going to read the one before that. Deuteronomy 16. This is just one of those where they're talking about offerings and the 10th coming in, and he says, no one should ever appear before the Lord empty-handed. This is not a spectator sport. Okay, being a part of the people of God was not a spectator option. You were engaged. You didn't show up to temple. You didn't show up with empty hands. Each of you must bring a gift in proportion to the way that the Lord has blessed you. That was just how he set that up so that he would continue to bless the nation. And if you go to Malachi, which is the last book of the New Testament, or Old Testament, he goes on to say this: should people cheat God? And so I'm just telling you that. Yet you have cheated me, but you ask, what do you mean? Well, you did it. How did I ever cheat you? Well, you've cheated me out of tithes and offerings that are due me, and you're under a curse now, for the whole nation's been cheating me. Now, this can be set up as a real kind of a, why are you cheating God? I actually heard sermons preached like, don't rob from God. Like, shame on you for robbing from God. He only wants 10%. I mean, I've heard all sorts of ways to describe this passage that can bring on the hammer. But in the context, you need to understand this was a system that God is looking at them saying, what? Like, why are you cheating? You're cheating me, but you're cheating yourself. You're cheating you. And he goes on to say this. He says, bring all the tithes, bring your 10th to the storehouse so there'll be enough food in my temple. And if you do, the Lord says, I'll open up the windows of heaven for you. I'll pour out a blessing so great, you won't have enough room to take it in. Try it, put me to the test, which is like, God does not ever say that. Like, that's amazing that he would say, look, try me. Understand, this is for you, so try it. And then he goes on to say this. I love the rest of this. It says, your crops are going to be abundant. I'm going to guard them from insects and disease. I'm going to do things behind the scenes that you don't even see. Your grapes will not fall from the vine before they're ripe. There won't be any waste in your life, says the Lord of heavens. And it says, then, look at this verse. Then all the nations will call you blessed, for your land will be such a delight. Again, coming back to it, you're cheating you. I have something so incredibly in store for you. So get on board with my economy. Get on board with what I've called you to do. I'm going to pour out blessing. And when I do that, it's going to go back to the way it was supposed to be. You're going to rise up as a nation. People are going to notice. And they're going to notice that your land's going to be a delight. And it's going to reflect the character and the love and the grace of God who you serve. And so Jesus shows up on the scene. And Jesus is not giving them anything brand new. Everything Jesus taught about money was not something like, where Jesus sometimes said, hey, I have a new command to give you. Love your neighbor as much as, I have a new command. Sometimes he would say things and be like, yeah, this is new. But everything Jesus had to say was constantly pointing back to, there's been something in place for thousands of years, guys. You need to remember that. Just several examples. There's one in Luke where it says, he's talking to the Pharisees, and it says, what sorrow awaits you, Pharisees, for you are careful to tithe even the tiniest income from your herb garden. Just picture like cilantro, okay? And and they measured it, and they went down, and they went, okay, and just 10%. And then they gave it back to God. Here you go. Thank you. He says, you've made this all about like the precise following of something. And he says, you've ignored justice and the love of God. He's not telling you shouldn't tithe. He says you should tithe, yes, but do not neglect the more important things. Like, it's not about so you gave me a little bit of your herb garden. Goody for you. You're missing the bigger picture. This was obviously what the Pharisees struggled with a lot. He continues on another story where people are coming in and they're giving money. So we have offering boxes in the back, Casey said, and they're kind of hidden. They're in dark corners because they're, we painted them dark so you wouldn't really see them. Because here's the reason. We don't pass plates for a reason we don't want to make it guilty or compulsion, and we don't honestly want you to engage in this unless you know why you're doing it. So people start giving, and people that in our church are very generous, and they go back and they put their tithes and offerings. Most of them do it online, to be honest. That's where most people give nowadays. So it's not even there. They just do it because they know to do it. But here in this culture, the box was up front, and it was a very big part of their gathering and their worship. So Jesus comes in and he sees all the rich people walking in with their little people with their bags of money, and they're putting money into the offering, and then they're like, thank you, walking around I'm the deal. And then here comes this little old woman, this widow. She throws in her 2 cents. So there's $3,000 and 2 cents in the box. And Jesus sees it and looks, And in order to help them understand, he says, I tell you the truth, this poor widow is given more than all the rest of them. For they give out of their tiny part of their surplus. But she, as poor as she is given me everything that she has. Like, Jesus is helping them understand. You don't understand. The thing I put in place for giving, the offerings that I put in place, the thing that God put in place, the economy that we wanted you to live by, had everything to do with your heart. Your heart. This is for you. She's given everything. More than the rest. Because they were just kind of giving the crumbs off the table, the stuff that they didn't, their surplus, out of the excess they had. Goes on, there's another example where this is oftentimes used in prosperity gospel teaching, and it's this idea that you give what you receive. Your gift will return to you in full. So you're going to give something, and then it's going to return to you, but it's going to be pressed down, it's going to be shaken together to make room for more. It's going to run out and pour into your lap. The amount you give will determine the amount you get back. Now, this is a sowing and reaping principle, which is true. But oftentimes people take this and they're like, okay, so I'm going to give $100 and I'm supposed to get like $100 with some interest back, right? That's how God works. Because he's like a genie and if I invest, then he pulls in and I get profit. Because basically this, if you look into the root of all these words, it's banking terms. It's like, no, there's going to be profit for you. There is. There is going to be with interest. Like several times in the Bible, it talks about there being a payment back, 100-fold even. So sometimes we'll want to take those verses and use those and wield those somehow for our benefit. And again, Jesus is like, yeah, you're missing the point. You're completely missing the point. He goes on to tell stories about the talents, bags of money given to different people and how they're gifted and how they're used. And then he looks at them and says, what have you done? He comes back after a long time and says, what have you done with what I've given you? What did you do with the 10 bags? What did you do with the 5? What did you do with the 1? It's all about stewardship. And this wasn't a brand new principle. This is something that Jesus is like, this has been around a long time. For you to take what God has entrusted you and to be accountable for it. You've heard me say it at the church before. You're either a good steward or a bad one. Like there really is no middle ground. You either follow God, you're either following God's teaching on finances and money, or all the money and wealth that you have is yours, and good luck. It's one or the other. There really is no middle ground, according to how Jesus was reminding them of what this system looked like, this economy of giving to God and how money played a part. He ends one time he ends some teaching with this statement: "Where your treasure is, your heart is." So he goes through this whole teaching and he says, "Look, guys, you need to know where you're storing up things." And where your treasure is, where your value is, what you put the most emphasis on, that's where your heart, that's where you yourself are tied and aligned to. So now we go back to Luke 16. And we look at this incredible passage where Jesus in his wisdom 2,000 years ago says, you can't do both. You can't. You are either going to live your life serving God, living in his economy, and receiving the blessing and living that life that I called you to live. Or you're going to serve your money. That's what he's saying. You can't do both. It's going to be one or the other because there's too much tension. There's too much, they're going in opposite directions. That's why we call it the reverse economy of God. They're completely sort of anti-logic. So Jesus in his wisdom knew it. He said, look, the chief competitor of your heart is not the devil. It's the way you are now going to be enslaved to your stuff and to your money. That's the chief competitor of your heart. And so I want to give you some real practical, hopefully some very practical understanding today of how this plays out. We have in our life, a couple of our life groups are going through a study called a breathing room. And it's a big study. It's about several different things, but it's the idea of living with margin in your life. It's an excellent study. If you're in a life group, tell your life group leader to do the study. It's a very good study. And I want to give you some visual examples of some of the things that was discussed on the week that they talked about money, because it kind of plays itself into why it is that Jesus, again, had to address this issue. He had to do this for us. So let me make sure I got my thing here. A couple of the examples he gives helps us understand this. So here's, if you just look at this, this is time and money, okay? Time and money. Sort of like the increase however old you get versus how much money you make. And for most of us, we would love to picture it goes like this, right? I make more today than I did when I was 19. Everybody with me? Nod your head, right? Well, it looks amazing on my iPad. That's all I'm saying, okay? So what it looks like is, no, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that. So if not, I'm going to get really visual with my hands. Is it okay? It's not working? Did something happen? It worked so good in the first service. You don't even know. All right, tell me if it shows up. Nothing? Okay, I'm not going to worry about it. No worries, Dan. Good try. First service was amazing. All right, let me paint this picture for you, best I can. I just wanted you to see some numbers. As we get older in our life, we hopefully make more money, okay? And this is the visual demonstration that he had. But the reality is that for most of us, everybody in the room here, you guys, we all live on a percentage of our income. Did you know that? We all live on a percentage. We all spend and live on a percentage of what we receive and our income. The problem is that for most of us, if you draw that line, the line of our spending and living is right next to it. Most of us are living 100% all the time. There is no margin. There is no breathing room. There is no space. And for some of us, and I'm not trying to pick on anybody today, but for some of us, there's a red line that goes above it. And some of us are living on like 105%. Like every year, our expenses are getting more than our income. Every year, it just seems like it started with a house and it started with a car payment that was a little higher than we could afford, and it was really a good deal, a good value for the family, and then it started with some credit cards and maybe one, and then the limit went up. If you're like the government, you just decided to put it up a little higher, Then it was another one. Then you got a charge card, which is not really a credit card. Let's be honest. It's just a charge card. And all of a sudden, you're living your life. You're spending more than what's ever coming in. So it's getting deeper and deeper. And I want you to understand that this is why I get it. When I talk about giving, when we talk about it as a church, which is not that often, we talk about generosity and just doing what God has put on your heart to do and investing in the kingdom of God. People look at me and they're like, Matt, let's just say I believe. Let's just say I believe what you're saying. But the picture of my life looks so different. I can't. You start saying things like 10% and people are like, what? Are you like 10 actual percent? Or 10% of what's left over? You know what I'm trying to say? Like, our lives there is no margin. And our lives, we're living at 100% all the time, week to week, paycheck to paycheck, and there's nothing there. And then churches and pastors and those jerks start talking about giving money to the church or giving money to build a well in Africa. And all we can do is say, even if I agreed with that, I can't do it. And I want you to know I get it. But everybody falls for the same lie. Well, Matt, if I just had a little bit more, if I just made a little bit more, then I'd really be able to start contributing. Listen, it's such a lie. You felt the same way when you made $20,000 less. If the 19-year-old you could hear the 39-year-old you, they would think, you're making what? I'd be set for life. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, it's a lie. It's what we all fall for. It's what we all believe. And the reality is that this is just a principle, is that when we're living at that 100%, we're living constantly in this margin with no room for giving, no room for margin. Hear these words. We are not serving God because we can't. We are living in such a way that all we can serve is our money. Well, somebody in your life group needs help. Somebody in your life group needs you guys to rally around and do this. And you've had these conversations with yourself. Well, I really don't have anything to give. I guess I could maybe babysit their kids. I mean, is there anything I can do? Because I can't give anything. I mean, I'm serving my money. I am enslaved to this. It enslaves our emotions because all we do is worry about money. All we do is worry about the fact that we're not going to have enough or that we left something on the table. You know, we fight and scrape for everything we can possibly get, and it just fills our emotions, and it makes us slave to our emotions and slaved in relationships we don't even want to have. We can't even afford to have relationships without networking with people that benefit us somehow. God, that's sick. This is what happens when Jesus says, you just can't do both. There was a system that I created. And then the other example is similar, but it's like there's a system I created where I'm going to bless you and I'm going to help you and you're going to receive more and more and more and God's going to pour out on you, but you're going to choose to live at 90% or below. That was the system. And God's early on said, this is the system by which people are going to know you, I'm going to bless you, and you're going to bless others. There's people in our church that live on 80% or less. And they give some here, and they just have some that they save. They have some that they give to other places. And there's people that I know that increase their giving or saving by 1% every year. Isn't that amazing? But they're making an intentional choice. They're saying there's something to this. I started with like 3%. I started somewhere, and all of a sudden God showed up, and something happened, and now I'm just hooked. Like now I know what it is to live in my life, giving to God and receiving and understanding the reverse economy of God. I know what it feels like. I also know what it looks like to live my life financially with some breathing room, so that when things come up, I'm able to meet a need. When things are, when a well in Peru needs to be done, I'm able to respond. When a mission trip that I feel led to take, I'm able to contribute and invest in it. Like there's something for us if we would just understand and if we would honestly just believe and have faith that He meant this for us and for our good. But for most of us, listen, I get it. Most of us are living at that tight, no margin, no room. I get it. So here's where I want to stop today, because I don't want to spend any more time trying to explain something that you're all very intelligent. I know you understand it. You might not believe it, but I know you understand it. Here's the challenge today. I want you to just start. Start taking steps towards this reverse way of thinking. This reverse economy of God. Start taking some steps towards that. Stop believing the lie you tell yourself, the lie that you got to leave everything, you can't leave anything on the table, that you need to worry about everything. If nobody's going to worry about you, you got to worry about you. Stop believing that lie. Start taking steps towards this thinking, towards these guidelines. In any way that you can, start believing that every time the preacher talks about money, it's not because I'm trying to get in your, I was going to say pants, that's not right, into your wallet. Okay? All right? Stop being cynical. Stop this. Start actually putting your faith in the provision of God. The second would be to begin to give or tithe. We don't use the word tithe that much, but tithe is that word, like I said, it has a root and understanding of that 10%. But I want you to start giving, and here's what I want you to do. I always tell people this in giving. There's 3 P's that you can follow, okay? Make it a priority. Means that there's 2 kinds of givers. There's people who give what's left over. It's real sporadic, if they have anything left over. And there's people who give first and live on what's left over. They make it a priority. The second is choose a percentage. I'm serious about this. I'm telling you, the worst thing you can do, the worst thing you do is tip God on the way out of this room, okay? I got a 20 in my pocket. Matt did pretty good today. Didn't upset me too bad. There you go. Choose a percentage. Be somewhat consistent. I know that God talked about it. He said 10%. But it could be more. It could choose 1%. I don't care. I don't need anything from you. Choose 2, choose 5, choose 7 and a third. Whatever works for you, whatever you feel like God's leading you to, choose a percentage and be consistent. And the third is be progressive. Progressive is hard because it's you finally get to a place, you're finally doing 10%, but you've done 10% for years, and so you don't even think about it anymore. You need to up that percentage. You need to, Adam's over here, he said last year, he's always talking about rounding up. Round up that check, which most people say, no. Then you're that Pharisee clipping off a little bit of the cilantro leaf. No, it's just 10. Do whatever God's called you to do. Make it progressive. Make it a challenge. Be challenged in this because that's where your faith continues to grow. When you step out in faithfulness, and in your faith, God responds with his faithfulness. That's the way it works. And guys, again, this idea of starting and beginning to give and tithe, God said to test him. Like he said, bring it. You know what I'm saying? Like give it your best shot. The third thing is to record and journal what God does. I don't have time to talk about this one, but if you don't know where your money goes, you need to take the Dave Ramsey class in January. You need to be recording where your money goes so you know. You need to journal what God does. How he shows up in your life. My wife and I have talked about it. We've gone for years sometimes without any car repairs. That was not always the case in our life. And when that happens, we want to write that down and go, I don't want to forget how God has continued to show up and to provide. And every year when we continue to give more, when we continue to give more and live on less, it's not because we made any more money, but God's continuing to do more and meet all of our needs, and we're living on less than we were the year before. And that's only God. Record and journal what he's doing. I want to tell you, we don't want anything from you, so here's the deal. I'm just going to tell you to take a challenge. It's November. Start. Choose to give or tithe, whatever you do, and make it progressive. Make it a challenge for yourself. Do it to the end of the year. Do it for the next 60 days. Take a 60-day giving challenge here, and I want you to record and journal what God does. And here's the deal. If he doesn't do anything, if it's the worst decision you've ever made, come to me in January, we will write you a check. I already got my advisory team's permission. We'll write you a check. I don't want anything from you. God doesn't really want anything from you. What do you really honestly have to give him? This is for you. If you don't understand this process, this system, this reverse economy, it's for us. So as a church, I want to do the best we can do to help you facilitate that feeling. So start giving. Be consistent. Make it a priority. And if you get to January, I don't care if you're the biggest skeptic in the world, you can come lie to me. God did something amazing you don't want to know. I don't care. I'm not going to check your financials. Just come and talk to me and we'll write you a check back. We believe God when he said, test me. We believe him. I'll tell you this is amazing. You know that thing about that lie that says, well, if I just made a little bit more money, I'd start giving. Yeah, I want to be a part of what this church is doing. I want to be a part of seeing ministry and mission grow. Did you know that we just grabbed a number this week. If everyone in our church, if every household, which means if you're married, it's just one of you. If every household that calls Journey home made $30,000 a year and they tithe, they give $3,000. If every person who calls Journey home actually gave and they only made $30,000 and they tithed after that, guys, we would have, this is the church that you go to, we would be dealing with over $500,000 more than what our current budget is to pour back into missions and to pour back into ministry. That's money I can't even think about. We wouldn't even know what to do. That's where God designed something and said, even as a church and as a ministry, guys, we are just simply reflections of our generosity. This church is simply a reflection, really an amplification of how it is that you and I really believe that God has something for us when it comes to our money. If Jesus were here and he said, guys, you know how it is. You know how your neighbor thinks about this. You know how your mom thinks about this. You know how your boss thinks about this. They scrape, they worry. Money is they serve their money. They serve their money. You know how it is. You know how it is with the people around you. And then Jesus would look at you and I and would say, but not so with you. Not so with you. You're going to live in a system. You're going to live in an economy that blesses you so that you can bless others. And when it comes to money, it's not serving our money. It's giving our money. It's giving back a percentage, proportion, an offering, a first fruit. It's something that we do so that our heart can remain His. I wish that we would believe that. So start somewhere, start believing that. If you're going to start anywhere, start believing those words. Let me pray for us today. Heavenly Father, I ask you to give us the wisdom and the faith to believe that even this thing that we don't like talking about, this issue of giving or money or whatever, that this is really important to you. And God, I want the faith that everyone can believe that this is for us. You put something in place for our benefit, for a blessing. God, I don't know what that looks like in every life. I just know that when you show up, we are never disappointed. God, I pray that you would move where we are weak, that you would take right now the fear, you would take now the shame and the guilt of the fact that maybe we haven't been living for you at all. That why in the world, I can't start with money because my whole life is gone. That you can start somewhere. That's it. God, please let us start somewhere today. Taking steps towards you, taking steps to follow you, and taking steps that we want to make sure that you have our heart, that nothing else does. God, I pray that your strength would show up. That God, the amazing, just beyond what I can even fathom, stories of you moving in people's hearts and lives just because they began to do something that you promised them would have blessing. God, I pray for those that would take that challenge. God, I pray for those that would begin to give back. Even though they're stuck at that 100%, they don't have any idea how they could do it. Show up in strength where we're weak. And bless us, God. Lord, we thank you for your word today and what it means to us. We respond as we sing and worship to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
We hope you've enjoyed engaging in our worship experience. Everything we do at Journey is to help make a difference in people's lives. If God has been moving and working in your life, we would love to hear your story. You can share it with us at mystory@thejourneyonline.com. If you would like to invest in the ministry and mission at Journey Church, you can give online at thejourneyonline.com. Thank you for investing in the lives that are changing at Journey Church.